Coming up on this episode of the Striving Satisfied Lifestyle. And once you get all this in your family calendar, you're ready to go. You're creating a life where you're able to balance parenting and personal time, whether that's personal time as an individual or personal time as a couple. All right, so I'm not going to waste any time getting into the content of this episode. The first thing I want to share with you in terms of balancing parenting and personal time is an overall concept that before I understood this or before I really even thought about this, I struggled a lot with balancing personal time and parenting because I just didn't understand how the two truly worked together. And I see this a lot in various relationships and marriages where without the knowledge of this, it's very difficult to balance parenting and personal time. So, this concept is you have three identities if you are married and you have kids. So, you have a spouse and you have kids, you have three identities. And before you're like, Kyle, that's too early in the morning or it's too late in the afternoon for this, just hear me out. I'm going to explain it in a very simple way that hopefully will allow you to understand it, but also implement it into your own life. So, as a single person, you have one identity, meaning you are an individual. So, your identity is as an individual when you are a single person who doesn't have kids. Once you enter a relationship, you now have two identities, one as an individual and one as a couple. And what this helps you gain clarity about is so many couples are like, my spouse doesn't like to do X, Y, or Z with me, or I don't want to do X, Y, or Z with them. This mindset of having two identities, if you are in a relationship, helps you solve this problem. Because if you love going to the beach and your spouse doesn't, then going to the beach may be part of your identity as an individual, but not as a couple. Whereas you and your spouse may love going on short road trips to try new restaurants or stay at new hotels or whatever inns that you've never been to before, but you don't do that by yourself. So that means that activity or those things are part of your identity as a couple. And this next part is where people get caught up quite a bit. And that's that when you have a child, you don't lose an identity, you don't transfer one of these identities, you actually gain a third identity, which is as a family. So then you're as an individual, as a couple, and as a family. And the reason I say people get caught up here is because, and don't get stuck on these numbers, it's just an example, but when you're single and you have no kids, 100% of your time is dedicated to your identity as an individual. Once you get into a relationship, that now you have two identities, so that time is now split 50-50. 50% for you as an individual and 50% as a couple. What happens when you have kids is that you add this third identity as a family, but it kind of takes over. And I'm talking for most people, and it is something that I've been working on in my own life. Like, this identity as a family can creep in and take over all the other identities, or what happens most of the time is that it takes over the identity as a couple, because on the weekend you spend time as a family. So you're like, oh, well, I spent a bunch of time this weekend with my spouse and my kids. So you think that's time with your kids and your spouse, but in reality, it's time as a family. It's not individual time with your spouse as a couple. So understanding this thought process will help you with everything else that I'm going to share with you in this episode. But I just wanted to make it very clear that we cannot count family time as time with our spouse. Sure, it is, but if you want a better relationship, if you want to live a better life, create a better life, this is an essential concept to understand. So, going forward in this episode, I want you to think of personal time as an individual and time as a couple, and parenting time is time as a family. So, parenting time is with your kids, but just think of it as that's the identity as a family. Even if your spouse is off doing something, and you're taking care of the kids, think of that as the identity as a family, and that's the parenting time. I just wanted to jump in here and remind you to download the monthly check-in activity. You can complete it as an individual or as a couple, but either way, it will help you and your family slow down, reconnect, and start living a life that you actually enjoy. It covers the things that you want to get done, the experiences you'd like to have, the important things that you'd like to celebrate, and it helps you create better relationships with extended family and friends. So if that is something that you want in your life, go to strivingsatisfied.com/monthly check-in to download it now. Let's get back to the episode. Tip number 1 is something that you've probably heard before from your family or your friends, but I'm going to give you actual tactical things that you can use to do this. So tip number 1 is work together. And this is not about how to manage household duties together or how to manage the responsibilities of parenting together. These are 3 points that I want to make that will help you work together so that you can balance parenting and personal time. So the first thing is, if you don't have one, get a family calendar. My wife and I have had a family calendar for probably a decade at this point, before we ever had kids. And the first thing it does is it helps you stay organized. So anything that's going on in your life should go on this family calendar. Get rid of your other calendars. And it's like, if the pets in your house have a vet appointment, that goes on here. If you're staying late at work one day because you have a meeting or something else, that goes on here. If you're going out with friends, that goes on here. And it just allows you to stay organized as a unit, as a couple working together. But the more important thing I think it does is that I see so many couples that are like, oh yeah, he didn't know or she didn't know we were doing this weekend, so they scheduled something else that they're going to go and do. And now he's going to do that or she's going to do that, and I'm doing the thing that we had planned on doing, like going to somebody's birthday party or something like that. And so having a family calendar, if you use it and you're very intentional about it, removes the ability for either one of you to be like, oh, I didn't know that was happening this weekend, because it's either on one person for not putting it in the calendar or it's on the other person for not looking at the calendar. And that is why a family calendar is so important. It's like, if you have one, put everything that you need to on here, and it will allow you to just be on the same page. And that's the first step in working together. It's not about who does the laundry, who does the dishes, who does the dirty diapers. It's like, okay, what's our plan for our family? How are we going to spend our time? And it's laid out for you. You all can make adjustments to it. You can work together to figure all that out. But the family calendar is the first and foremost essential thing to working together. The second part of tip number 1 is that this is more of a mindset thing or something you can do in the moment, but it's when someone, either you or your spouse, schedules something to do as an individual, that should be the other person's cue that they schedule something for themselves. Meaning, if I say, hey, I'm going to go and do this with this person on this weekend, that should be my wife's cue to be like, oh, I haven't done something in a long time. I should probably schedule something for myself so that I can take care of myself as an individual and go out into the world as an individual and rejuvenate for myself and my family. If you want to take this concept to another level, which is what I always try to do, and my wife always tries to do, it's like, when I personally say, hey, this weekend I'm going to go do this with this person, I suggest to my wife, like, why don't you pick something, or a day at least, that you have some personal time? That right there is working together. If you intentionally say to your spouse, hey, I'm taking time for myself as an individual on this day, why don't you pick a day that you get personal time too? That is the ultimate way of working together in terms of balancing parenting and personal time. So that's the second part of tip number one, but just don't look at it like a tit for a tat. It's not like, oh, they're getting personal time, so I get personal time. It's like, no, we're working together to ensure that both of us take time for ourselves so that we can show up the best as possible in our relationship and in our family. But with that being said, I just want to move on really quick because I know that you're busy and you don't have a ton of time. That's why I keep these short. But the third part of tip number one, working together, is simply talk about what you want and need. And this is so important because if their spouse had time for something, they don't know what their spouse would like to do, right? So if you talk about what you want to do and what you need to do as a family, as a couple, and as an individual, meaning, oh, I'd really like to go golfing with my two friends, or I'd really like to go to this craft fair with these people. Talk about that as an individual, talk about it with your spouse, but in terms of you as an individual, also talk about it in terms of things you want to do as a couple. I'd love to try this restaurant with you. I really think we need a weekend away or a night away. And then talk about it as a family in terms of a family. Also, like, I would love if our family went to the aquarium. I would love if our family went on a hike at this place. Whatever it is, but just talk about what you want and need for those three identities and share that with each other. Because when I know what my wife needs in terms of what she wants to do and what she feels like she needs to do, I can make those things happen. Let's just say your spouse loves going to cycle class and exercising. If you know that, you can get them a gift card or buy them 20 classes to cycle. But if you don't know that, there's nothing that you can do to make that happen. So that's point number 3 of tip number 1. Tip number 2 is monthly wants and needs. If you can figure this out with your spouse, even better. But if they're not on board, at least do this for yourself. So it's an activity that I enjoy doing with couples or individuals. And it's very simple. You just grab a sheet of paper and put 3 boxes on it. The first box is as an individual, the second box is as a couple, and the third box is as a family. All you do for this, and I guess if you want to do this with your spouse, each of you will have that same sheet of paper. You do it on your own. You write down the things that you want and need in those 3 boxes, and then you work together to combine that onto a third sheet. So just know that nothing in Striving Satisfied is set in stone, but it's like, okay, this is what I want and need for a month. This is what you want and need for a month. Let's meet somewhere in the middle. I'll give you some examples. So as an individual, I suggest starting with how many personal days do you want? And you may write down 2 and your spouse writes down 10. And you guys I recommend having equal personal days because it works better that way. But you can meet in the middle at 5 or whatever. And the important part is that you are sitting down and being like, I think I'd be good with 2 personal days a month. And these are like non-negotiables. If you don't get to them, you don't get to them, but they are a priority. So during the holiday season, you might not have them if you have 8 Christmases like I do. But the point is that if you're clear about what you want and need, it's more likely that it's going to happen. Like I was saying before, if your spouse doesn't know what you want or need, how's it going to ever happen? So as an individual, I'd start with personal days. And then if you move into the couples box, what do you want? How many date nights do you want? How many date days do you want? What things do you want to get done that you typically put off in terms of like, these are more responsibilities for the two of you that's like, okay, I could do this or they could do this. So it could be like mopping the house, cleaning the bathrooms, mowing the lawn, organizing family photos. I love the organizing family photos one because that's actually ties into like a date night activity where you could have on this as a couple, we want to organize the family photos once a month, and that's one of our date nights. We stay up late, we have something to drink, have a glass of wine or something, and we sit and look back at the last 30 days of all the photos we took and all the fun things that we did as a family, and you organize them so you're accomplishing something, but you're also enjoying each other and sharing memories. So that's as a couple, but I'd start with, just like as an individual, start with your personal days. And then as a couple, start with like, how many date nights do you want? How many date days do you want? That's a good foundation. And then if we move into the family box, how many family days do you want? And how many family nights do you want, where it's like, okay, we stay up a little later, or we watch a movie, or we do something special. But the reason this is so important to do with your spouse, if you can get them on board, is because you may say, I want one family day where it's like we do nothing but have fun as a family every single week. And your spouse may be like, oh, I think 2 a month would be good, right? Like every other week. And by writing this down on your own sheets of paper and then sharing this, it's like you can see where each other's at. And you may be like, oh, I didn't realize that they wanted more family time, or I didn't realize that they wanted less family time than I do. And that's why it feels like I'm pulling teeth when I'm trying to get them to go and do something as a family. So just to recap this, it's like, figure out your monthly needs and wants. I know I went through this very quickly, but as an individual, as a couple, and as a family, and just do it with your spouse if you can, and then talk about it, because this is where this does tie into working together, but it is all about balancing parenting and personal time. So the as a couple and as an individual category is your personal time, because a date day with your spouse, that's personal time for the two of you together. The family days, that's family time. That's parenting time. You guys are in it. You may be going to do something all together and it's hectic because you have the kids with you, but the point is that balancing parenting and personal time requires being intentional if you want to do it in a way that feels good and do it in a way that actually makes you have a better life that you can enjoy more as a family and as a couple. That is it for tip number 2. Just figure out your monthly needs and wants in those 3 categories, as an individual, as a couple, and as a family. Tip number 3 is probably one of my favorites, because it's also the first step in my 7-step framework that I've created over the last decade for Striving Satisfied. And it's what I use in my own life to keep everything prioritized, keep it all straight. But tip number 3 is the monthly check-in. And essentially, I like to do this at the end of whatever month we're in. So if it's April, I do it the last weekend of the month of April, and I'll do it for the next 3 months. So it'd be May, June, and July that I'd be planning this all out for. What you do is grab a sheet of paper and put 3 columns. So first column would be May, second one would be June, third one would be July. There's 4 categories in each of those columns: adventure, celebrations, getting stuff done, and extended relationships. What you do, and it's so simple, you can download it at strivingsatisfied.com/monthly check-in if you want the full guide and the actual PDF that you can fill in to do this, but you don't need that. You can just do it on a sheet of paper like I'm explaining right now. What you would do is look at the month of May and be like, what fun things do we want to do in May? Look at June. What fun things do we want to do in June? What fun things do we want to do in July? You write them in there, and these aren't going to be things like necessarily go to the park. Those can be things that you fill in, but this is like, what is something that we want to do as an individual, as a couple, or as a family during these specific months? That's what you write down. Once you do that, you move on to important celebrations. And these are just things that you're going to celebrate. So July, it would be July 4th if that's something that you and your family celebrate. But you look at each month individually so that after you're done with this, you have one sheet of paper that lays out the next 3 months of your life. And you're like, okay, we have fun in here. We know what we're celebrating. We know what we have to get prepared for to celebrate. And then getting stuff done is the 3rd category. This is for projects that are things that you typically would avoid doing. So I used to write down every single thing that I needed to do, meaning I'd be like, I have to do the laundry, do the dishes, scoop the cat litter, take the air conditioners out of the windows or put them in the windows. This getting stuff done box in each month is not for that. This is for things that you typically would avoid doing, that you need a reminder about, that you need to prioritize. So as an example, in the spring, I have no trouble getting the air conditioners in all the windows in our home. It's like, it's getting warm out. Next week's going to be 85 degrees. Let's get the air conditioners in the windows. But in the fall, so September, October, maybe late August, I hate taking the air conditioners out. I have to take them out. I have to clean the windows. I have to put the screens back in. I know it sounds so simple, but I don't like doing it. I avoid it. So that is not on any month in the spring, but I make sure that I put it as a priority in getting stuff done in one of those fall months, usually sometime in mid-September, but it goes in the September month. The fourth box is extended relationships. Now, I get so much pushback on this because an extended relationship, in my opinion, or in my view, is just that anyone outside of your immediate family is an extended relationship. Who you consider your immediate family is completely up to you. So it may be grandparents, it may be your nieces and nephews. I don't know, and I really don't care who you consider your immediate family. The point is, anyone outside of that is an extended relationship, and it simply means that if you focus on these relationships too much or too frequently, they will leave you feeling extended, like you just can't get to it all. You don't have time for everything that you want and need to do because you're spending so much time on these other people. The reason that there is a box for this on your monthly check-in is because so many times in life where, like, you know, both my parents are divorced and my spouse's parents are divorced. So we have 4 families that we try to make time for and we like spending time with. And what happens is we're like, oh yeah, like we'll have to get together in the next few months. You know, it can't be as long as it was this time. And then it never happens. So this box on your monthly check-in is for those relationships that you want to maintain or make better and spend more time with those people that you're not going to typically see on a regular basis. If you see your parents on a regular basis, then they're probably not going to be in this box. It's like, yeah, we're going to see my parents every other Tuesday or whatever it is. These are like, I really enjoy these people. I want to create a better relationship with them. And by doing this, I'm intentionally making time for them. So long story short, who in your life do you want to maintain and create a better relationship with that you typically put off doing so? Meaning you see them at the holidays and you say, oh, we'll have to get together in the next few months, and you never do. If you look at your months and you're like, oh yeah, like I would love to hang out with these people. I always say that we're going to get together more. Just put them in there and then be intentional about scheduling something with them during that specific month. And you get to pick what works for you because you're being intentional and doing this. So that's the monthly check-in that I highly recommend you doing, at least by yourself. If you can get your spouse to sit down for 30 minutes, it shouldn't take longer than an hour at most, but sit down and be like, what fun do we want to have? What are we celebrating? What do we need and want to get done? And who do we want to spend time with outside of our immediate family? It will truly change your life and help you create a better life for yourself, your spouse, and your kids if you do this. The second aspect of your monthly check-in, though, is once you get that done, I want you to look at your monthly needs and wants that I talked about in tip number 2, because what you're going to do once you fill out those 4 categories, adventure, celebrations, getting stuff done, and extended relationships, is start putting them in your family calendar so that if someone asks you to do something, you can look at your calendar and be like, oh, no, I'm busy that weekend, I'm busy this weekend, but I have this time free. And with your monthly wants and needs, I want you to put them in your calendar as well on the family calendar, but it can be different every month. It doesn't have to be like the second weekend of the month we have a date night. It can be different, but that's why during the monthly check-in, you fill out the standard 3 months and the 4 categories, and then you look at your monthly needs and wants and place those throughout the month as well. And once you get all this in your family calendar, you're ready to go. You're creating a life where you're able to balance parenting and personal time, whether that's personal time as an individual or personal time as a couple. You're able to balance these things by doing these 3 things. So that's all for this episode. I know I went quick, but you can always go deeper with me in my membership, my program, Design Your Legacy. But either way, I just want to summarize these main points that I gave you in this episode today. Tip number 1 was work together. The basics of doing this is have a family calendar. When one person schedules something, that should be the cue for the other person to schedule something. And then talk about what you want and what you need in general, as a family, as a couple, and as an individual. And then the second tip, tip number 2, was figure out your monthly needs and wants as an individual, as a couple, and as a family. That'll help you gain even more clarity toward living a life that you truly enjoy if you do that. And then the third tip, tip number 3, was have a monthly check-in where you talk about the next 3 months and what adventure you want to have, what things you want to celebrate or you're going to celebrate, what stuff you want to get done that needs to be a priority but is easy to put off. Don't put all the tiny little to-do list items on there. Just what are the big things that you typically avoid doing. And then the fourth category was extended relationships, where you list out who you want to see that month and maybe even add in like what you want to do with them. But that was the third tip. Have a monthly check-in. And during that monthly check-in, also look at your monthly needs and wants list and just get all that stuff into your family calendar so that the two of you and your spouse, can be on the same page more often than most other couples. Before I go, I just want to remind you to go download my monthly check-in activity that helps you and your family slow down, reconnect, and start living a life that you truly enjoy. It's completely free. It takes less than 30 minutes to complete. Just go to strivingsatisfied.com/monthly check-in to get it now.